My name is Kevin. I'm on Twitter and GitHub, and there's my blog. Just some context so you understand where I'm coming from. I spent 10 years as a .NET developer, 5 years working at Microsoft, mostly on .NET related stuff, and the last 3 been independent consultant doing mostly Rails and JavaScript. This is our company and my partners. Robbie's an amazing designer, and Adam has done a spectacular job making pool balls look really good on Canvas. So basically, Microsoft came to us and once they were looking at releasing the first beta of IE9, saying, can you do a cool HTML standards-only demo to show off the goodness of IE9? And we said, that sounds like fun. So this is what the game looks like, and let's just play it. Oh no, this is what I get for having... As you can see, we have realistic-looking balls rolling. Very quickly, you realize, though, in testing these kind of apps and building them, you really need some debug modes. So let's just activate the bomb right now and explode it. And sometimes when you're testing, you don't necessarily want to play to the end of the game to make sure all the collisions work. So you can just turn gravity on, and then all the balls start rolling in one direction. So this is like the tilt mode built in. And if you hit G again, you can actually turn the gravity around. So that's the idea. So you can play with debug mode. And so just a quick tip for people building games when you're not having normal flow, having kind of the debug key handlers is super, super nice. So I am a technical guy, and Robbie did an amazing job, my business partner, kind of designing the look and feel of Agent 8-Ball, and he can't be here because his daughter's having her first birthday. And so being the good father that he is, he said, I'll send a video instead. So good for Robbie. Just 1 second here.
Agent 8-Ball started off as a pitch. We wanted to create something that felt bigger than the browser, something that didn't feel like traditional HTML. And the specific idea for creating a pool game came to us when I watched my son try to install Flash on our home computer so that he could play a pool game on Miniclip. So we started designing, and we had a pretty good idea of how we wanted the game to work, but we felt like it was missing some personality. We hadn't really identified a theme for the game yet. So we came up with this kind of funny idea, which was, what if James Bond, instead of being an action hero and a poker player, were a pool player? And we started exploring this theme around that, and that's where the idea of Agent 008 emerged. So we started building out this concept based around a 1950s spy hero. And we found a lot of great imagery that we could draw upon. That's actually a really good era for finding kind of a cool and distinct style. And then we needed to allow that spy theme to collide with our pool hall theme. But that turned out to be a little harder than we expected because pool halls are dark and smoky and not really consistent with the spy theme that we were going for. Somehow we ended up turning our attention toward bowling alleys instead to find inspiration. I think probably because I had seen The Big Lebowski that weekend. But it turned out that bowling alleys were really kind of perfect. And it led us to this really cool mid-century style where everything was made out of plastic and wood. I think at one point we said we wanted it to feel like James Bond meets The Incredibles. The trick, however, was to avoid being overly retro. We wanted to make sure that the visual didn't get grungy and that it stayed really clean. And somehow in that search for a mid-century feeling that was also really clean, we came across this image, which almost certainly was inspiration for this really great illustration by Matthew Lyons. And this image became a starting point for a lot of our color palette. So you can see the greens and the yellows that we used in there. And finally, we worked with a really talented designer in Brazil named Carol Ravello, and she produced this comp for us. This is the first comp that we had for the game. And Carol was great. She paid a huge amount of attention to the little details that really make the game come alive, like the cloth texture on the pool table itself, and the reflection on the balls. And finally, we created this. This is the final working comp that we used to produce the game. So that's it. That is our design process for creating Agent 8-Ball. Obviously, there's a lot more to it than that. There was a lot of Photoshop work and a lot of coding. But the thing we think that made this design successful was that we took the time to understand our theme. And that theme informed everything that we did. And so there you have it. Thanks.
Robbie will listen to this later, so we should. Uh-oh. And if you're going to crash at the end of the video. That's perfect. And the video is linked there. It's been spectacular as more of a technical person to work with Robbie, who not only is a really good developer, but amazing in terms of a design feel. Even going so far as to make sure that the sounds of the pool table sounded like they all came from the same pool table. Like if you go find random audio on the web, sometimes the sound of the room wasn't quite the same for different pool ball sounds. And so that level of detail really added a lot. So I will admit, especially coming down to the Valley, and especially as a Microsoft alum, that I certainly have an outsider's perspective. I worked at Microsoft on WPF, did lots of .NET, worked on a UI framework that was very, very kind of heavy and very object-oriented, really powerful, but very deep levels of inheritance and this type of stuff. And obviously is strongly typed in a compiled environment. So moving over to do more work in Rails and JavaScript was kind of interesting for me. My first experience with Rails was adding these checks like, is type of the first part of a method? Like, no, I have to make sure this is a string. And very quickly I was told that, just trust it, and duck typing is a cool thing. But very different than what I was used to. And the kind of apps I built really haven't been that interactive. It was standard kind of CRUD apps, post back, maybe do some animations in JavaScript for when things come in or move out, but nothing really complicated, nothing really deep. And what I realized is when we looked at building Agent 8-Ball, we were looking at a much deeper problem than the standard kind of business forms app that I've been used to building on the web. We were looking for a physics engine that worked in JavaScript, and at first I started looking at building my own and realized I'd forgotten way too much math to even think about making something, let alone high performance, because there's lots of optimization. And we found this circa 2008, which might as well be 1998. This gentleman made a port of the C++ library to JavaScript. And if you look at the code, it's actually hilarious because he has commented out destructors and from the C++ code. There's really like the legacy is still there. And so an amazing effort. The guy deserves props. But he used a prototype for an inheritance model. It's an object-oriented system. In some cases, 2 or 3 levels of inheritance. In some cases, very object-oriented, but not very clean. I cleaned up his spelling mistakes. Then I realized he actually had some broken English here. I don't think he's a native English speaker. But this idea, comment that make sure you load everything. I don't know what depends on what. If you don't include everything, it'll just break. So include everything. And it was big. And we didn't need most of it. It was actually half a meg of JavaScript when we started. And so already kind of a non-starter, even if you look at some basic compression libraries. So if you think about, that's just the physics model. And then the pool table, we had this notion of balls and pockets and collisions, the bomb thing that we had. We need to track that in kind of another layer where the game, where we have a state, if we won or not, the score of the timer, the sound effects. And then even around that, we had things like preloading and music and tracking our analytics. And so already I'm looking at this and I'm wondering, like, how many jQuery plugins do I need to write to accomplish this set of stuff? And I was kind of inundated. And as an outsider, especially someone coming from .NET, a very kind of object-oriented system, I was looking for something that kind of got me back, because I could imagine factoring this out in more of a object-oriented, componentized model. And that led me, and especially being kind of 3 guys that are not experts at JavaScript. And this is when I discovered the Google Closure tools. Is anyone familiar with these? Okay, good, because most of my talk is actually about this set of stuff, because it was really the biggest technical thing. So this is the description broken out into bullets. Makes it download and run faster, certainly. JavaScript to JavaScript, it's just a compiler. But this middle line is the important thing. Parses, analyzes, removes dead code, and actually finds errors. You actually just follow good practices around documenting your code, and it tells you if you try to call a method with two members and it actually requires 3. And an amazing thing about the optimization is it's really smart about inlining. There was a case where we had direct access to a field, so I was calling into an object and just grabbing a field value, and I was like, that's kind of broken, so I wrapped it in a method with a getter and a setter, like you'd expect, and then I reran the build command, and the output from the build command was absolutely identical. So the Google Closure compiler was smart enough to look at that get-set method I created, and it's like, that's inline field access. So the compiled version was no less efficient than the original method, but in terms of looking at the code and using the code, it was much tighter, much better encapsulated. So really happy with this set of tools. Excuse me. And obviously Google bets on them for all their assets. So this is an example of the start of the game class to give you an idea of how you think about factoring JavaScript with the Clojure tools. So at the top you say, this is what I provide, kind of your class or namespace definitions. You define your requirements explicitly. So this is super nice where we'll get into that in a bit, but basically it figures out what you use and don't use and just doesn't include stuff you're not using, even at the method level. So if you call certain 3 of 10 static methods in object-oriented parlance, it won't include the rest of those methods from that object. And so not only is it a compression, but really smart about kind of weeding out things you're not using. And then you do things like this, where you say, I'm extending from a class. These are the types of the parameters I take. This is the object I'm extending from. And then at the bottom you see defining member variables and types. And the compiler was actually really, really nice. And so kind of coming from a more structured object-oriented perspective, I figure it enforces good practices around componentization, declaring what you take in, what you put out, what your dependencies are. And the result is, even if you don't use the compiler, is better code. It's more reasonable, it's more componentized, and more maintainable. And it's really, really helpful as we built a more complicated system. Check my time here. So really it's a set of 3 things: the compiler, which is Java and Python, the libraries, which in many ways replicates a lot of what you'd find in like a jQuery. So string parsing, dealing with objects, dealing with arrays, and it's built with a compiler in mind. Ooh, we just lost the light. And the linter is really nice. It's a command line tool for cleanup, and it tells you if you have bad code smells around spacing, and enforces a set of things. And I have a set of tools that wrap this. So I actually took that original demo and published out a remake of it. So the library is open source, the version we've done on GitHub. And this is basically a port of the original with all the Google Clojure magic. A set of command line tools that I created around this for building, compiling, and running are also available on GitHub. You can look at the demo there. And you can see the source code of the demo. And I'd really love help on this. If you're looking to build anything with physics and you go in and you build a demo 6 or 7 or 8, fork me, send me a pull request. I would love to kind of push this forward because I think this is the kind of functionality that's really useful for building cool experiences. And there are some bugs still that I would love to fix in Box2D. So we'd love help.